Please help me welcome Dean Solomon and Congressman Beto O'Rourke. Thank you.
Well, am I on? You think they're clapping for you or for me? Beto, welcome to Tufts University. Welcome to Somerville, Massachusetts. We couldn't be more thrilled, all of us, this audience, to have you here. Classes just started this week, and so this is really a great kickoff. For those of you who haven't seen the announcement, we have a great lineup of speakers and guests coming this semester, so we hope to see you often. I know that you like to keep your head covered, and so I want to give you a Tufts hat.
Right, yes. Let's do that. My head is big.
No. Yeah. I want to thank Rabia for that wonderful introduction and how proud we are that she is a Tisch scholar. I also want to acknowledge a Tufts alumna who was part of our contact with Beto, which is Jen O'Malley Dillon, is Beto's campaign manager. And she emailed me the other night and said, how would you like to have Beto O'Rourke on campus? I said, sounds good. Anyhow, let's get right to it. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, and then we're really going to spend the bulk of our time together letting our audience talk to you. But as you may know, at Tisch College of Civic Life, we believe that there are many pathways to civic engagement. But one of those is a political pathway, which is the one that you've chosen. You've been an elected official as a member of the city council of your hometown of San Antonio. You've been a member of Congress. You have been a candidate for the United States Senate, and now you're seeking the White House. So why are you running? Tell us about, why do you choose politics as the way to make a difference in this world? And I know you like to get close to the audience, so if you want to stand up while you answer this question, I'll just stay seated.
That sounds good. First of all, Tufts, how are you doing today? Great. So good to be with you. I especially appreciate the two of you who are wearing a Beto shirt right now. Feels good. Feel so warmly welcomed. Feel at home here. Dean Solomon, I want to thank you for the invitation, the quick turnaround on very short notice to bring all of these amazing people here together. To each of you for taking some time out of your day to welcome a stranger from far west Texas. El Paso, Texas is my hometown. It's where I was raised, where my wife Amy and I are raising Ulysses, who's 12, Molly, who's 11, their little brother Henry, who is 8 years old. It is one half of the largest binational community in the Western Hemisphere. With Ciudad Juarez, there are 3 million of us, 2 languages, 2 countries, connected, not separated by the border, the Rio Grande River, to form something far greater and more powerful than the sum of the people or the number of parts involved. It's absolutely magical. When I met Amy on a blind date, pre-Tinder, 15 years ago, she wasn't from El Paso, and like any good boy in my hometown, I picked her up from where she was staying and drove her downtown, and we walked over the Paso del Norte Bridge and went to the Kentucky Club to have a margarita where they were invented, dicen, allí in the Kentucky Club. Walked down Avenida Juarez, past the Customs House, where the first time a president of the United States and a president of the Republic of Mexico ever met, they met there, Taft and Diaz, and neither of them needed a translator because each of them spoke both English and Spanish. From there, we went on to the Mission of Guadalupe that has stood the test of time for 330 years and just took all of that in. I wanted Amy to see our community, our entire community. And the date worked out. We were married within a year. We produced these 3 amazing kids that we're raising in the same hometown that I was raised in. And it's a really special place. And beyond the magic that I'm trying to describe, El Paso is one of, if not the safest cities in the United States of America. Not despite, but because it's a city of immigrants. and asylum seekers and refugees from the world over who have chosen us, who left their hometowns, their home countries, very often their families, to start anew as strangers in a strange land, to do better for themselves and their kids, the same way that Amy and I want to do better for ourselves and our kids, but also to do better for us. And by their very presence, they have. We are stronger. We are more successful. We are very, very much safer because they came to this country. And so the dean asked, why are you running? Because we are all connected at the end of the day. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke of this inescapable network of mutuality, this single garment of destiny into which we are all tied and woven together. As special as El Paso is, and as far away, as distant as it is from the other centers of population and power, we are still part of this country. On August 3rd of this year, a little more than a month ago, a gunman drove 600 miles from Allen, Texas to El Paso, Texas, driven by fear and paranoia and racism that has always been present from the very foundation and creation of this country. August 20th of 1619, the first slave brought here against their will and in bondage to build the greatness of this country on their backs, a greatness that their descendants would be effectively and functionally locked out from enjoying and participating in, all the way up through to this very day in 2019. But a racism in the modern era that had never been given so much license, never welcomed into the open as it has been by this president, who calls Mexican immigrants like those with whom I live in El Paso rapists and criminals, calls asylum seekers who have traveled 2,000 miles fleeing the deadliest countries on the face of the planet, countries like Guatemala that are also enduring historic droughts brought about not by God nor by Mother Nature, but by you and by me. Our excesses are in action in the face of the facts and the science and the truth when it comes to climate change. To those asylum seekers, he offered cages for their children, deported their parents back to the very countries from which they fled, tries to take money right now in the middle of storm season as Dorian makes landfall in the Carolinas away from FEMA to build a wall that is a solution in search of a problem. And he referred to them as animals, as predators, as an infestation. In May of this year, 2019, in Florida, at one of those rallies, the president said, what are we going to do about this invasion, these people, these immigrants who are coming to this country? And someone in that crowd yells out, shoot them. And the crowd roars with laughter and their assent. And the president provides his consent by smiling and laughing along with them. Well, this guy in Allen, Texas ordered an AK-47, a weapon designed to kill people as effectively, as efficiently, and as great a number as possible on the battlefield. And when that weapon came in, his mother called the police department, and Allen said, what in the hell does my son need with this? He's not in the military. You don't need it to hunt. It's not necessary for self-protection. And the police said, I'm sorry, ma'am, nothing we can do about it. In the hours before he went on this rampage in the Walmart in El Paso, Texas, he posted a manifesto echoing many of the phrases used by the president about this invasion that he was trying to fend off, using talking points from Fox News, this fear of replacement of white Americans by Hispanic Americans, and then went into that Walmart and opened fire and killed 22 people in a city that loses 18 people in a given year on average. Told the police afterwards he came to kill Mexicans. That is the cost and the consequence of Donald Trump. That is the cost and the consequence of the violence, the gun laws or lack thereof in this country, and our inaction in the face of the opportunity to save the lives of our fellow Americans and make this a more just country for everyone. And I believe that this is the defining, the deciding, and perhaps the last moment of truth for America, to get this right in the face of any one of those challenges that we have before us, whether it's gun violence that claims 40,000 lives a year, whether it is the foundational endemic racism or the fact that white nationalist terrorism is on the rise in this country, or whether it is climate change that affords us only 10 years within which to act or forever lose communities like the one that we're in right now to the generations that follow us. An economy that works too well for too few and not at all for too many. Healthcare that right now is a function of privilege or luck or circumstances instead of the basic human right it should be. And millions of people living in this country, working the toughest, the shittiest jobs available in America today, their undocumented status used as leverage against them to pay them a fraction of their value of what they deserve, being exploited and used. And in the face of that, our acceptance of the status quo. I'm running, Dean Solomon, because this is a moment for all of us to stand up, to be counted, to do everything within our power to make sure that we not only stop the worst of the excesses and the racism and the un-American behavior of this president, but ensure that we live up to and fulfill our potential and our promise as a country, that more perfect union that every single president has talked about, and yet as a nation we have never fully fulfilled. That is our opportunity at this moment. Those are the connections that I hope to draw. And lastly, and I know this is something that is important to you and important to the student body here, I want to bring every single person into this election. Y no me importa where you live, who you voted for last time for president, or whether you have voted at all. By going to every one of the 254 counties of Texas, by showing up for young people at community colleges, at HBCUs, at senior high school classrooms, going to those who we were told we should not visit with limited time and resources because historically they have not voted. We said, I would not vote either if no one showed up for me and listened to my story and included me in their campaign and the service that they want to provide. And at the end of the day, we won more votes than any Democrat had in the history of Texas. Young voter turnout during early voting was up 500%. 2 new members of Congress, both Democrats, replacing long-serving Republicans. And in Houston, Texas, 17 African-American women elected to judicial positions of power and trust, changing the face of criminal justice in the most diverse city in the United States of America. Showing up for people works, and so I'm showing up for you today. Looking forward to listening to you and hearing your questions. Thank you very much. Gracias. Thank you.
Thank you. So I do want to just ask you a little bit more specifically something about gun violence. And you mentioned your own hometown of El Paso and the 2 recent mass shootings in your state. We live in a country where every community has been affected by gun violence, probably disproportionately communities of color. We live in a country with tens of thousands of gun deaths and many more gun injuries, not to mention the trauma that's experienced by children who are exposed with this. You said people are living with fear, feeling like they have targets on their backs. But perhaps there's no other issue that exemplifies the failure of government to achieve what a majority of Americans want. What can be done?
We've got to listen to people and share their stories. You know, even the number I gave can come off as an abstraction. 40,000 people lose their lives to gun violence every year. Is that a lot? Is that a little? Does that matter to you? If it's someone you care about, if it's someone in your life, if it's someone within whom you can see yourself, then maybe it does. We were just in Midland and Odessa, which a week ago lost 7 people. This was the 4th massacre in Texas in under 2 years. The Sutherland Springs Church, Santa Fe High School, El Paso, Texas, and now Midland and Odessa. And we went to the hospital in Odessa, and we met with some of the survivors, including a police officer through his heroism probably saved the lives of countless other citizens of that community. But we also met the mother of a young man who had been shot in the hand, and he was in his hospital bed recovering. But he was shot in the hand because he was trying to save his sister's life. And the gunman who had an AR-15, again, it's high impact, high velocity round, which expends its entire kinetic injury inside of your body to tear it to shreds, to destroy you so that you bleed to death and cannot get back up, which is what we want for the enemy soldier on the battlefield. But that's what happened to his 15-year-old sister. And because of the rampage and the number of people who were shot and the number of different locations that those shootings took place in Midland and Odessa, it took them an hour for the ambulance to show up, and that mother and her son watched their daughter and sister bleed to death over the course of that hour right in front of their eyes. So what do we do about this? Listening to that mother, understanding what just happened in El Paso, Texas, Mexican Americans, Hispanics, knowing that they were hunted for their ethnicity, feeling like they have, as you just said, a target on their back. We cannot accept this as an act of nature, a comet that just struck that Walmart and shit happens. I guess we'll just have to go on with our lives. This is an inherently violent or evil or bad country. Or this is a human-caused problem with a human solution. And we have to be really honest with ourselves about what that solution is. Universal background checks, that will certainly save lives. Red flag laws, where we take that gun out of your hands if you're displaying behavior that would lead us to believe that you will kill yourself or kill someone else in your life or in my life, that'll save lives. Ending the sales of AK-47s and AR-15s, that'll save lives as well. But there are more than 10 million AR-15s and AK-47s on the streets of our communities today. And so we must take the necessary, though politically difficult step of saying that we have to buy those AR-15s and AK-47s back. We have to mandate that, not electively, but this is a mandate that every single American who owns one of them will have to fulfill. And the way that we do this is not only listen to the victims of gun violence or our fellow Democrats, but bring in people who very often are not included in the conversation. That's what took me to a gun show in Conway, Arkansas, which I did not think was the brightest idea on the part of my campaign as I was about to walk in the door, because the day before we just announced that we want to buy back every single AR-15 that anyone at that gun show owns right now. But when I walked in, I was so positively surprised to have so many people say that they too believed that we had a problem in this country. They wanted to be part of the solution. Some said, I will gladly sell that AR-15 back or destroy it, cut it into pieces. Others said, no way in hell you're gonna get your hands on my gun. But I've got 3 kids in school as well, and I'm worried about them too, and so let's try to figure something out. 90% of America believes in universal background checks. 46% of America, with no politician having the guts to even talk about it, believes in mandatory buybacks of weapons of war. If we reflect true leadership and courage in this country, if we have someone or a campaign or an action or an act of Congress to rally around, I'm confident that ultimately we will get this right. And so that's why I'm putting this at the centerpiece of my campaign. It will mean saving lives and ensuring that everyone is allowed to live and fulfill their true potential.
Thank you. Let me just ask you one more question, and then you're all going to have a chance to ask Beto. But you mentioned the importance of young people. That's of great importance to us here at Tufts and at Tisch College. It's great to see people who've heard about this event, 24 hours ago and filled the hall. Your Senate campaign attracted a lot of youth support and engagement, but I'm sure you'd agree that there's much more that we can do to reduce barriers to voting, to lift up youth voices, especially in marginalized communities, to attract more young people to public service, and to build a government that's more responsible to youth concerns. So how would you intend to go about doing that?
A couple of ideas. One would be automatic voter registration. So on the eve of your 18th birthday, you are already automatically registered to vote, ready to go into that ballot box and help decide the future of this community or your state or this country, and by extension, the world. Same-day voter registration with as few hassles as possible, so that if for whatever reason you're not registered and you want to participate in that election, you can. But I really appreciate you mentioning marginalized communities, communities that have been on purpose and by design suppressed and kept out of the ballot box for as long as there's been a ballot box in this country, certainly ever since the end of Reconstruction. Texas is a great example. We ranked, before last year's midterm, 50th in voter turnout. And that's not because we love our democracy any less than you do here in Massachusetts. We were literally drawn that way. Communities of color, African Americans, Mexican Americans in particular, drawn out of a congressional district based on their ethnicity or their race to diminish the power of their vote or the likelihood that their voice would ever be heard. In Texas, you can use your license to carry a firearm to prove who you are at the ballot box and be able to vote, but you cannot use your student ID at the University of Texas at El Paso at the ballot box to prove who you are so that you can vote. By design, we've excluded entire populations from participating. In Georgia, Stacey Abrams would now be the governor of that state if hundreds of thousands of voters had not been purged from the voter rolls. So what's the answer to this? A new Voting Rights Act, especially important in states like mine from the former Confederacy, to make sure that no one is excluded from their right and ability to vote, and then seeking to enfranchise and register those who, through their involvement in the criminal justice system, again, disproportionately felt by communities of color, are brought back into the process, are able not just to vote, but to run for elected office and to represent their communities. If we do that, we envision 55 million additional Americans registered to vote, participating in our elections. With a little bit of a higher voter turnout, 30 million of them will participate in the 2024 elections. So I think that's a great opportunity for our democracy.
Thank you. And now I want to turn it over to the audience. And I'd like to prioritize student questions first, if we may. We have two staff members in the audience who have microphones, so raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question. One of the staff members will bring you the mic to you. Be sure to speak into the mic because we have folks watching and listening on live stream, and we want them to be able to hear the questions. And our usual request, please tell us who you are. Make sure you ask an actual question. Don't make a speech or tell a story. No repeat questions, so if somebody beats you to it, think of another one or sit down. And please, only one question per person so we can get to as many people as possible. And Beto, you can do whatever you like, whatever you're more comfortable with.
Yeah.
This guy is just going to sit back and listen.
Yeah.
And raise your hands if you want to ask a question.
Great. Hi, my name's Nikki Maddie. I'm from San Antonio, Texas, and I was really proud that last year I cast my first vote ever for you as a senator in Texas. So now that you're vying for the presidency, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about your vision for comprehensive immigration reform.
Yeah.
On stage, Secretary Castro challenged you to support the repeal of Section 1325, which you have thus far refused to do. So I wondered if you could elaborate, if that's not the solution, what is the solution to the humanitarian crisis at our border?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Thank you for the vote. Thank you for bringing some San Antonio love to Boston and making that connection between Massachusetts and Texas. No, 1325, which I co-sponsored legislation to rewrite when I was a member of Congress so that we don't criminalize anybody coming to this country seeking asylum or refuge or shelter. And if we think about it for a moment, and some here may be or may have been that person or have family members who were that person, you're at your most desperate and vulnerable and defenseless. And there's no reason in the world that we should put you in a cage or keep you in a cinder block, concrete floor cell where you're sleeping on that floor at night under a Mylar blanket. We should never separate you from your family. And we should do everything within our power as a country to reunite those families, especially those children who have been separated thus far. So that's an important step, and I want to make sure that we do that, but that is absolutely insufficient to the challenge that we have right now. There are 10 million here in this country who are undocumented. More than 1 million we refer to as dreamers really know no other country but this one, may not speak any other language but English. And if we send them back to a place where they no longer have friends or relatives or networks or any kind of connection, And against those long odds, they're successful. They'll be successful for that place, not this place. I want them to reveal their true genius here in the United States, and that's why I'd want to make them U.S. citizens as soon as possible. Their parents, their sisters, their brothers, the millions more, as I said earlier, working the toughest, the most back-breaking work available in the United States today. Imagine how much more they could do as legal permanent residents, as U.S. citizens, living without fear of being deported. Even those who've been here for 20 and 25 years have committed no crime, have given far more than they will ever be able to take back. Let's recognize that by rewriting our laws in our own image, in the image of Boston, of El Paso, of San Antonio, of this country of asylum seekers and refugees and immigrants from the world over. But we've got to go steps further than those. We've got to go to Guatemala and El Salvador and Honduras, these countries that are producing so many of the asylum seekers that we see, who travel 2,000 miles, much of it on foot, some of it atop a train known as La Bestia, or the Beast, to come to this country in the first place. And let's have the humility of acknowledging that no one wants to leave their country. As beautiful and amazing as America is, most people want to stay where they were born, where they live, and they leave only because they have no other choice. When they themselves are hunted, or they fear that their kids will be killed or raped or will starve to death, that moves them just like it would move you, just like it would move me and Amy if that were the only way to save our kids' lives. So making sure that we accept these asylum seekers when they come here. Do not ask them to remain in place in Mexico. In Ciudad Juarez alone, 13,000 people who are not from Mexico are forced to stay in Mexico, defenseless against those who prey on the most vulnerable in that country. But then also addressing the endemic poverty and violence and drought that we're seeing in Central America, so much of which has a connection to this country. Guatemala, 1954, the United States led a coup that overthrew the democratically elected president, Jacob Arbenz Guzman. In Nicaragua, in El Salvador, in the 1970s and 1980s, we involved ourselves in their civil wars. In this country, 4% of the globe's population, 25% of its consumption of illegal drugs. Those drugs have to pass through some countries, but they also bear the consequence and the price of our war on drugs that has militarized their communities and hollowed out their institutions of civil society. So we have an opportunity, and I would argue a responsibility, to do the right thing by and for those people in that country. Either try to solve that problem here when they show up at our border, or help them where they are to be able to stay in those countries in the first place. Those are some of the steps I'd like to take. Thanks for asking. Here we go.
So, hi Beto, my name is Deepan Garadia, and I'm a sophomore from Princeton, New Jersey. So really regarding privacy and protecting the data rights of individuals, especially with the last election with Cambridge Analytica, and that data is now surpassed crude oil in value. Do you support federal legislation to protect people's privacy? And how do you see yourself adapting to the ever-changing technological climate?
Thanks for asking the question. The answer is yes. Right now, we treat these social media platforms, for example, Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, like we would treat a utility, a common carrier that has no responsibility for what is delivered at the end of the pipe, the content that we receive. But we all know that the feeds that we scroll through are curated for us, are calculated to appeal to us and our willingness to click on something and take some kind of action, or look at an advertisement, or make those platforms and their owners and investors and shareholders money. We have become the product on these platforms. Our privacy, our photos, our interests, our likes, our dislikes are all traded, sometimes sold without our knowledge or our consent. So I see these platforms more akin to a publisher than a utility. And the impunity with which they can act right now, the immunity from any kind of legal consequence or accountability or justice, leaves us in the breach. So I would change the way that they are treated. I would support federal legislation to do that. We would mandate that they change their user agreements with all of us and the Russians who are on there with us. capitalizing on our likes and dislikes, our biases, and turning us against one another, as you said they did in 2016. We would make sure that Cambridge Analytica or their successor could not illegally harvest our data and our personal information and use it for political ends here in this country or for some other third country, as they did. And we would make sure that this is vigorously enforced so that there are consequences. Consequences that can be measured in the fines that are paid, consequences that can be measured in companies that, if they continue to act without regard to the public interest, will be stopped or broken up or forced to no longer be able to practice in the way that they are today. So thank you for the question. Appreciate that.
All the way to the back.
Hello, my name is Malcolm Zuckerman. I'm a sophomore from Concord, Massachusetts. I was wondering where you think that our foreign policy focus as a country should be, especially in regards to adversarial relationships coming into the next term.
Yeah. Thanks for the question. We have the most pressing challenges that we have ever faced, and number one among them is climate change. 10 years left to us, not as Democrats or Republicans or Americans, but just as humans on this planet to get this right. And so every connection that we have with the rest of the world should be leveraged to address climate change. Even if we were to flick the switch in this country, if that switch existed, to stop emitting carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases, we're only 16% of the globe's contribution to the problem. So we need to be able to work with everyone else. And that means meetings like the one we were just at G7, where the President of the United States did not even show up at the conversation about the climate or the fact that the lungs of this planet are burning in the Amazon. We would use meetings like those to leverage the power of all of the countries present to make sure that we do the right thing, not just for the first world, but for the southern half of the world that has borne the brunt of the first world's inaction in the face of the facts. Everything that we know today in 2019, we knew in 1979 about what is happening to this planet and our contribution to it. We again have culpability, responsibility, but also opportunity to lead. I would make sure, as we just suggested, that in Central America or in other parts of the globe that are facing historic droughts or violence or civil war, that you have American leadership. And wherever there is an open question about whether the future is a democratic or an autocratic one, we always solidly, strongly, unequivocally side with the former instead of the latter. But right now, you have the President of the United States turning his back on our democratic allies and partners and friends, embracing strongmen, not just Vladimir Putin, who he invited into our election in 2016 and then apologized for once he was sworn in to office. But it is Duterte in the Philippines, al-Sisi in Egypt, Erdogan in Turkey, and in Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman is bombing the shit out of Yemen into the last century, into the next humanitarian crisis on this planet. 7 million people are approaching mass starvation and dehydration on one of the most water-scarce countries on the planet today. And the President of the United States not only looks the other way, but literally said out in the open, though they are doing this, though they murdered an American-based journalist with complete impunity, they buy billions of dollars in weapons and arms from this country. So we got to keep doing business with them. We got to stand for something in this country, on that world stage, but it must importantly begin at home. And that means treating everyone in this country with the respect and dignity that they deserve as human beings and addressing that endemic racism that I talked about at the outset. So thanks for asking the question. Appreciate it.
Hi, my name is Winona.
Where am I looking?
I'm like,
She's all the way back to your left.
Okay,
Hi.
I see you there.
My name is Winona. I'm actually a recent alum and a cybersecurity researcher. So my question is surrounding the fact that individuals in my field are currently gearing up for monitoring presidential campaigns and the threats on the fear that may arise, not just from the Russians, but also from the Chinese and cyber criminals and even hacktivists. And so given your history in one of the hacktivist groups that coined that phrase, as well as this current climate, what is your campaign doing to protect itself from these threats? And also, how does that reflect on your cybersecurity policy for the United States to defend organizations from foreign threats in cyberspace?
Such an intelligent question from clearly an intelligent person who really should be giving the answer to this question and not just posing it. So I hope that we can stay in touch and you can help me out. But look, I'm under no illusion about the dangers that we face in this country and in political campaigns in particular. Someone mentioned earlier Cambridge Analytica. There was a reference made to the Russian involvement in our elections in 2016. We know that the phishing and cyber attacks in our campaign, in the DNC, probably the RNC for that matter as well. Perhaps leaders here at this institution are a daily or a minute-by-minute threat against which we must be vigilant. It does not help when you have a president who still to this day will not acknowledge that attack took place, will not command the leadership nationally that we need to make sure that we are safe from the next attack. So we've got to rely on the institutions that we have that are still working despite the president's best efforts to undermine them. We've got to be able to, on our own, make sure that we are conducting this campaign in the safest and yet strongest way possible. And without going into details, we've adopted protocols to make sure that we're protecting the data that we're sharing within this campaign. But we really need a commander-in-chief who is aware of the scope, the scale, the severity of this problem, and that it could very well not just undermine our elections, and that's fundamental to our future as a democracy, but our military standing, our competitive advantage economically, everything that makes America stand out in the world in the first place could be undermined and compromised by these breaches in security and our lack of resources and leadership to meet that challenge. So I want to acknowledge that I understand that is an ever-present threat, that it's been unmet by this current president. As president, I will make sure that we have the resources commensurate with that threat and that we call it out into the open exactly what is happening, and that those countries who participate in these kind of cyber attacks against the United States understand that there will be real consequences and accountability for their actions. Again, something that we have failed to do under this administration. Thank you for asking the question. Appreciate it.
Okay, we're back on the other side of the room, and we have time for 2 more questions.
Hi, I'm Justin Schuster. I'm a freshman here at Tufts. I'm from Simsbury, Connecticut, and my question for you, Congressman, is in 2014, you voted against condemning Vladimir Putin and Russia for their aggressive actions against other European countries. My question is, if you could change your vote on that issue, would you? And how does this shape your foreign policy towards Russia if you're elected president?
Justin, I want to stay in touch with you as well, because I don't remember taking a vote that would fail to condemn Russia for what they've done. Their invasion of Georgia, their annexation of Crimea, the civil war they precipitated in the eastern part of the Ukraine, what they're doing in Syria right now. I mean, all of this threatens the people in those countries. And really, ultimately, the logical conclusion of this is it threatens the United States and our friends and our allies and our service members stationed around the world. So, no, I'm very concerned about that. I wonder if you're referring to a vote I took not to arm or send United States arms to Ukraine. And people may differ on whether that was a wise vote. My concern is that we're in our 18th year of war in Afghanistan. We're 28 years in Iraq. I was a high school senior. I'm going to be 47 years old this month. I was a high school senior when George H.W. Bush first announced U.S. military involvement in Iraq. We've been there every single year, every successive presidential administration since. Pero además, we are in Syria tonight. We are in Yemen tonight. We are in Libya tonight. We are in Somalia tonight. as well. I just don't want to see us go into more wars, and it's hard for me to come to the conclusion that U.S. military involvement makes situations better in these countries versus a focus and investment in diplomacy. So anyhow, that's my position on that challenge, and certainly we can do a lot better than Donald Trump, whose craven behavior when it comes to Vladimir Putin. You saw the press conference in Helsinki, Finland, on foreign soil, on that stage, defending Vladimir Putin, who invaded our democracy instead of our intelligence community. So I will make sure that we hold him to account for what he's done to this country first and foremost, but also for their adventurism, their behavior, their invasions of other countries around the world. Thanks for asking the question. Appreciate it.
This is going to be our last question.
Hi, I'm Julia. I'm a freshman here at Tufts. I know that you have endorsed a healthcare plan called Medicare for America instead of Medicare for All. Could you elaborate on what your plan would do and why it would be better than Medicare for All?
For the millions of our fellow Americans who have no insurance, no health care, no ability to see a doctor, for my fellow Texans who, with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder and clinical depression, far too often are getting arrested on purpose to be taken to the county jail, the one place they are guaranteed to get the care, the prescription to the psychotropic medication, the roof over their head, the warm meal that they otherwise would lack. The county jail system in Texas is the largest provider of mental health care services in Texas. The county jail in Harris County, home to Houston, is the largest inpatient provider of mental health care services. Those uninsured, unable to get care right now, would be automatically enrolled in Medicare and would not have to worry about it again. They could focus on being well enough to go to school, work a job, start a punk rock band, create a work of art, live to their full potential as a human right. Those who are insufficiently insured, meaning you can't afford the copay, and so you just don't go to the doctor, you don't fill the prescription, like the insured school teacher in Weatherford, Texas, who in 2017 was diagnosed with the flu, but didn't fill her prescription for flu medication because she didn't have $119 in her checking account and died of the flu in the United States of America in 2017. She would be able to move over to Medicare. No questions asked, no copay for the medications, no copay for a primary care visit, no copay for a mental health care visit. But those who have employer-sponsored insurance, including members of unions who fought for health care plans that work for them and their families, sometimes plans in lieu of wage increases or other earned benefits, are able to keep them. So we get to universal, guaranteed, high-quality care, but we preserve choice and respect the decisions that our fellow Americans have made. And that means they now have primary care, mental health care, and it also means that every woman is able to make her own decisions about her own body and have access to the care that makes that possible. So that's our plan for health care.
Beto, I want to thank you for being here. We believe that elections are a teachable moment. This is a great opportunity to teach students at Tufts about democracy. So when you're with your fellow candidates, either at a debate or in New Hampshire this weekend, tell them how warmly you were received at Tufts.
I will.
Encourage them to come, but trust me, we will always remember that you were the first.
Okay. Thank you all very much. Les agradezco. Gracias y nos vemos.